The vase fell in half a second, shattering across the hardwood floor. I was standing 3 steps away. I hadn't touched it. My daughter-in-law looked at the broken pieces, then straight at me. "You did this." "I didn't." "Don't lie." She cut me off, her voice ice cold. "You were right there, always hovering like that, ruining everything." Her closest friend let out a quiet laugh. "Honestly, letting him stay here was a mistake. You can tell just by looking at him." My daughter-in-law pulled out her phone, her voice instantly softening. "I'm so sorry. My father-in-law broke the vase you gave me. Yes, it's completely his fault." I stood there, silent, and for the first time, I understood exactly the kind of people I was living with. I'm grateful you're here. Before this story goes any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country. I read everyone. Some details in this story have been shaped for narrative and educational purposes. Names and settings are constructed, but the weight of what it means, that part is yours to keep. So I built this house with my own 2 hands. Every brick, every beam, every window frame on Church Street, I placed them myself. 40 years in the trade teaches you how a structure breathes, how the smallest crack in the wrong place travels upward through a whole building if you leave it long enough. I knew how to read a house the way some men read a face. What it never taught me was how to read the people living inside it. My name is Douglas Mercer, 67 years old. The house at 114 Church Street, Charleston, South Carolina. I broke ground on that lot in 1987, the year after Margaret and I married. I poured every dollar I had saved into making it something that would last. Not impressive lasting. There is a difference. And most people don't understand it until they've watched an impressive thing fall down. And it did last. Through storms through the years when Caleb was small and the house was full of noise. Through the long quiet after Margaret passed 5 years ago. I live in the smallest bedroom now, the one at the end of the hall. I gave Caleb and his wife the master room when they moved in 18 months ago. Caleb had called one evening, voice careful the way it gets when he needs something. "Just a few months, Dad, just until we find our footing." I said yes before he finished the sentence. That's what fathers do. 18 months later, I was still waiting for them to find it. That Friday morning, I was in the living room before 8:30, doing what I always do when something feels off. I cleaned, slow, methodical work, cotton cloth in hand, working my way along the display cabinet near the east wall, the one I had built myself from, salvaged white oak the year Caleb started school. I was not in anyone's way. I was simply a man in his own home, tending to it the way he always had. Caleb had left for work at 6:30. The house had been quiet and mine for 2 good hours. Then the front door opened without a knock. Serena came in first heels, hitting the hardwood in that deliberate way she had, each step landing like a small announcement. Behind her was Tiffany Corwell, her closest friend, a woman who had mastered the art of agreeing before a sentence finished. Neither of them said good morning. Serena moved straight to the side table near the window, where she had placed the vase 2 weeks before, right after Beatrice Langford had brought it over. Tall, cream-colored, hand-painted blue florals along the neck. Beatrice had presented it like something sacred. Serena had received it the same way, setting it on the table with the deliberate care of someone establishing a claim. "Look at it in this light," Serena said to Tiffany, gesturing toward the vase. "Beatrice has one just like it at her place on Trad Street. She told me it came from a private collection, not the kind of thing you find in a shop." Tiffany made the right sounds of admiration. I kept my attention on the shelf I was dusting, 3 steps from the table. I had learned over 18 months that the wisest thing I could do in moments like these was to be quietly present and nothing more. Then Serena's hand swept wider, and the leather strap of her bag swung out in a short, hard arc. It caught the vase cleanly near the shoulder. The whole thing tilted off the edge. 1/2 second of silence. Then it hit the hardwood floor and shattered. A single clean crack followed by the soft scatter of porcelain spreading across the wood in every direction. The room went completely still. I was standing 3 full steps away. My cloth was still in my hand. I had not moved. Serena turned. She looked at the broken pieces on the floor for just a moment, and then she looked directly at me. Nothing uncertain in her expression, no searching, no hesitation. "You did this," she said, flat and certain. "You were standing right there." "I didn't touch it, Serena." I kept my voice even. "Don't." She cut straight across me. "I saw you reach toward that shelf." I had reached toward the shelf beside the cabinet to dust it. 6 inches to the left, 2 feet below the vase. But there was no version of that explanation landing anywhere useful, and I could see it plainly. Tiffany looked down at the floor and found something deeply interesting there. Serena already had her phone out before the last shard stopped moving. She pressed a contact, lifted it to her ear, and her voice shifted, softened, carefully reshaped. "Beatrice," a breath perfectly timed. "I'm so sorry to call like this." She turned slightly away from me. "Not enough. It's the vase, the one you gave me." Her voice caught just barely. "My father-in-law knocked it over. Douglas. He was standing right next to it, and it's gone, Beatrice." Completely shattered on the floor. A pause while she listened. "I know how special it was. I wanted you to hear it from me before you came by and noticed it missing. I would never want you to think I didn't treasure it." Then she turned slowly, deliberately, and looked straight at me over her shoulder, not with guilt, not with hesitation, simply to make sure I was still standing there, still hearing every word she was saying about me into that phone to a woman I had never wronged in my life. "Thank you for understanding, Beatrice. I'll explain everything when I see you." She ended the call, slid the phone into her bag, and walked toward the kitchen without another word to me. I set my cloth down on the cabinet, slowly, the way you set something down when you need your hands to stay still. I walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The morning was warm and quiet. From inside, I could still hear Serena talking to Tiffany, the tone of it light now, almost cheerful the way a person sounds after they have finished something they came to do. I looked toward the house next door. Earl Davenport's front window was closed now, but a moment before I stepped outside, I had caught him at that window standing completely still, hose in hand, watching through the glass. When our eyes nearly met, he set the hose down slowly and gave one small, almost imperceptible shake of his head before the curtain fell back. Earl had been my neighbor for 15 years. He was not a man who shook his head at nothing. I stood on my own porch in front of my own house, and I thought about what I knew about foundations. How a crack that starts small and goes untended does not stay small. How long I had been telling myself things here were manageable. Earl's window stayed closed, but whatever had been in his face a moment ago, something just beyond what I could fully read, had settled into the back of my mind like a nail driven clean and flush. I had a feeling it would mean something before long. I sat on the edge of my bed at 11 o'clock that night, both hands resting on my knees, staring at the thin strip of light under the door. From the master bedroom down the hall came the sound of Serena, on the phone, words too muffled to make out just the tone of her voice carrying through the walls. 18 months. I had been listening to that voice for 18 months, and I still wasn't used to it. I didn't try to sleep. I already knew I wouldn't. So I sat there in the dark and I let my mind go back the way it does when the house is quiet and there's nothing left to distract it. I remembered the night Caleb came to ask. He had stood in the kitchen doorway, shoulders slightly forward, hands in his pockets, the posture of a man working himself up to something. He was 38 years old, and he still looked like a kid standing in that doorway. "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out." "Go ahead." "And things have been tight. The rent where we are, it's gotten bad. And we were thinking just temporarily if maybe we could—" I nodded before he finished the sentence. "That's what you do. That's what fathers do." "And just until you get back on your feet," I said. 6 months maybe, that's it. 18 months later, I was sleeping in the smallest room in a house I had built from the ground up. I remembered the day I showed Serena the master bedroom. I had repainted it the week before, fixed the ceiling fan that had been wobbling since spring, made sure everything was clean and ready. I stood in the doorway and gestured inside like I was showing a guest into a hotel. Serena walked in, looked around once, then turned to me and said, "Does the main bathroom have a separate shower stall?" "Inbegin mayo as expinated and corpse." Not "thank you," not "this is very kind of you," just "does it have a separate shower stall?" "It does," I said. She nodded and went back to directing Caleb on where to put the boxes. I closed the door behind me and went to my room at the end of the hall. The thing about Serena was that she ran their household the way a manager runs a department, completely and without consultation. Caleb handed his paycheck over at the start of their marriage, and that arrangement had never been renegotiated. I had seen it clearly within the first month of them living here. Caleb didn't know what came in or what went out. He didn't ask. I had watched my son, a grown man with a good job, look genuinely uncertain when I asked him once whether the electric bill had gone up. "It's Serena handles all of that," he said, with the tone of someone repeating a rule they learned to stop questioning. Serena left every morning at 7:30 in a pressed blazer and heels, the picture of a woman with somewhere to be. But I was always gone by 5. By the time I came back in for coffee at 8, the house was empty. I never saw her come home in the evenings because I was usually in the yard or in my room. She had left every day at the same time, dressed the same way. And I had never once asked where she was going because it was not my business to ask. Now, I found myself wondering how long a person could leave the house dressed for work and come back to nothing. I lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. On the nightstand was a photograph I had kept for 30 years. Caleb at 10 years old, holding a hammer that was clearly too big for him, standing beside a half-framed wall in what would become the back bedroom of this house. He had found the hammer in my toolbox and dragged it outside before I had even finished my coffee that morning. "Let me try," he had said. "I want to do one. That hammer's bigger than your arm, son." "I don't care. Show me." I showed him. He swung too wide the first time and missed entirely. The second time, he caught the edge of the nail and bent it sideways. The third time, he drove it clean and flush. And he looked up at me with the kind of pride that only lives on a 10-year-old's face. "Again," he said. "Let me do it again, Dad." I lay in the dark and I smiled at the ceiling. Whatever Caleb had become, whatever parts of him had gone quiet over the years of that marriage, that boy with the hammer was still in there. I was sure of it. I had to be. At 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely, made a pot of coffee and took my mug out to the front porch. The street was still dark and still. I heard Earl's door open before I saw him. He came out in his old canvas jacket, the one he wore every morning without fail, and he stopped when he saw me sitting there. "No sleep either," he said. "Not much." He came to the edge of his porch and leaned against the rail, looking out at the street the same way I was. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the way two men can when they've been neighbors long enough. Then Earl said, without looking at me, "You know what I've learned after 70 years, Doug? The things that blindside a man are almost never things he didn't see coming. They're the things he saw coming and chose not to look at directly." I turned toward him. "Is there something you want to tell me, Earl?" He looked at me, then straight and steady. "Not yet," he said, "but when the time's right, you'll hear it." He pushed off the rail, nodded once, and went back inside. His door closed behind him with a soft, final click. I sat with my coffee and looked at the empty street. Not yet. 2 words, short and quiet, but they sat in my chest like something with weight. Earl Davenport was not a man who spoke carelessly. He did not drop words into the air without knowing exactly where they were going to land. Something was coming. I didn't know yet from which direction, but I had the feeling I was about to find out. Saturday afternoon, I went out to the backyard to trim the dead branches off the old magnolia along the fence line. It's the kind of work I do when I need my head quiet, no thinking required. Just hands and a pair of clippers, and something that needs tending. Serena had mentioned at breakfast that she and Tiffany had plans. Caleb was inside watching the game. I figured I had the afternoon to myself. I was wrong. I had been out there maybe 20 minutes when I heard movement on the other side of the low fence that separates my yard from Patricia Sims's property. A moment later, she stood up from behind the fence line, canvas gloves, dirt on her knees, the look of a woman who had been crouching in her garden long enough to feel it in her back. Patricia Sims had lived next door for 11 years. 62 years old, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who notices things and keeps them to herself until she decides she can't anymore. We had always been friendly without being close the way good neighbors are. She pulled off one glove and looked at me carefully. "Douglas, you doing all right?" "Getting there," I said. She nodded slowly, glancing once toward my back windows, then back at me. She had the look of someone turning a decision over for the last time before committing to it. "Can I tell you something?" she said, "and have it stay between us?" I set my clippers down on the fence post. "Go ahead, Patricia." She took a breath. "Last Tuesday, I was down here doing exactly what I'm doing now, trimming along the low fence. I was crouched down so Serena wouldn't have seen me from the yard." She paused. She was back there in that far corner behind the rose bushes. On the phone, talking low but sound, carries funny when you're close to the ground. I waited. I caught maybe half of it. Patricia continued. She said something like this: "Location is the best one on the street. The old man won't be a problem much longer. Now we just need to pick the right time." And then she mentioned a name. Patricia looked at me steadily. Hargrove Properties. The afternoon went very quiet. "You sure about that name?" I asked. My voice came out even. I made sure of it. "Pretty sure. I wasn't trying to listen, Douglas. I want you to know that. But once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it." She held my gaze. "I went back and forth all week about whether to say anything. Then I thought about the kind of man you are and what you built on this street, and I decided you had a right to know." "I appreciate that, Patricia. I genuinely do." She put her glove back on. "You've built half the good houses on this block. Just watch yourself." She looked at me once more, something firm and quiet in it, and then she walked back toward her house without another word. I stood at the fence for a moment, looking at the far corner of my backyard, the corner behind the rose bushes. I knew exactly which spot she meant, a natural alcove formed by the back fence and the tall trellis Margaret had put in years ago. Private, shielded from the kitchen windows. A good place to have a phone conversation you didn't want anyone to hear. I pulled out my phone and typed into the search bar, "Hargrove Properties, Charleston, SC." The results came up in under 2 seconds. Hargrove Properties, high-end residential real estate brokerage, office address on King Street, clean website, professional photography, a portfolio of listed and sold properties in the historic district, the kind of numbers that didn't leave much room for interpretation. This was not a name Serena had invented. This was a real company operating in my neighborhood, and someone had been having conversations about my house with them, without using my name, without my knowledge, without my permission. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then put the phone in my pocket and picked my clippers back up. I finished trimming the magnolia. I raked what had fallen. I worked until the lights started going orange at the edges, and my back told me it was time to stop. Inside, Caleb was in the kitchen heating up leftovers. He heard me come in and turned around. "You eat yet, Dad? I've got enough for 2. "I'm sure," I said. "I'll wash up." We sat at the kitchen table and ate together, talked about the game, about the weather turning about a pothole on the corner of Church and Water that had been there since spring. Normal conversation, easy conversation, the kind that costs nothing and asks nothing. Serena came home at 8. She set her bags down on the chair by the door, said a brief hello to no one in particular, and walked straight to the master bedroom. I watched her go down the hall. Caleb asked if I wanted more coffee. "Yes, no thanks, son," I said. "I'm going to turn in early." I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. Hargrove Properties. The old man won't be a problem much longer. Just need to pick the right time. I turned that over in my mind slowly, the way you examine a beam you suspect is compromised carefully from every angle without rushing to a conclusion before you have the full picture. I needed more than Patricia's account of a half-heard phone call. I needed someone who understood what the legal exposure here actually looked like, someone who could tell me whether what Serena was doing had crossed a line that mattered, and what my options were if it had. There was one person I trusted with that kind of question. He had been handling my affairs for 15 years, and he had never once steered me wrong. His office was on Broad Street, 12 minutes from my front door. Monday morning, I was going to be sitting across from Fletcher Crane. Monday morning, I called Fletcher Crane's office at 8:15. His secretary said he had a 2 o'clock opening. I told her I would take it. I put on a clean button-down drove to Broad Street and found parking half a block from his building. People in Charleston call the intersection of Broad and meeting the 4 corners of law. One corner holds the courthouse, one city hall, one St. Michael's Church, and one the bank. 4 institutions built to hold things in place. I had always liked that about this city. It understood that some things needed anchoring, Fletcher Crane's office was on the third floor of a narrow brick building, 2 doors from the corner. 15 years of working together, the deed transfer when I paid off the house, Margaret's estate, a contractor dispute in Mount Pleasant. Fletcher had handled all of it without fanfare and without error. He was 52 years old, precise and entirely unbothered by complexity. His secretary showed me in at 2 o'clock exactly. Fletcher stood, shook my hand, and settled back into his chair with a fresh legal pad. He looked at me the way he always did at the start of a meeting, pen ready, no expression all ears. "Douglas, tell me everything?" So I did. I laid it out the way I used to, run a job briefing in order, without editorializing, without skipping anything. The vase on Friday morning. Serena's immediate accusation while I was standing 3 steps away. The phone call to Beatrice Langford, word for word, as I remembered it. Then Saturday afternoon, Patricia Sims at the back fence. The half-heard conversation, the name Hargrove Properties. Then, Sunday night, sitting on the edge of my bed, pulling up their website. Real company, King Street address. High-end residential brokerage, historic district. Fletcher wrote the entire time, without looking up. When I finished, he read back over his notes, turned the page, and said, "Give me 5 minutes." He picked up his desk phone and dialed without hesitating. "Good afternoon. Fletcher Crane calling. I'm an attorney in Charleston. I'm reaching out regarding a residential property at 114 Church Street. I represent the owner of record." A short pause. "That's correct. I need to speak with whoever handled any inquiries related to that address over the past several months." He leaned back, pen tapping once against the legal pad. "I'll hold." The office was quiet. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on Broad Street and was gone. Fletcher straightened. "Yes, I'm here. How many contacts total?" He wrote. And the name she provided, he wrote again, underlined something. "Did she furnish any documentation power of attorney? Written authorization from the owner of record, anything at all?" He listened, jaw set. "And your agent flagged it as irregular," a pause. "Walk me through exactly what language she used regarding the current occupant." He went very still, wrote 4 words. "Thank you. That's what I needed." He set the phone down. He looked at his legal pad. Then he looked at me. 4 contacts," he said. "Mid-July through early September. A woman who identified herself as a family representative for the Church Street property. She discussed current market valuation with their agent, potential listing timelines. How quickly a sale could move once the property was, and I'm quoting the agent's written notes directly, once the property was cleared of its current occupant. I kept my voice level. "She said that. It's in their file." Fletcher turned the legal pad so I could read the 4 words he had underlined. Cleared of current occupant. "She had no documentation, no power of attorney. No signed authorization from you. Their agent declined to proceed and flagged the inquiry. That's the only reason you weren't blindsided by a listing appearing on the market." I sat with that for a moment. 4 calls, starting in July, while Serena was still walking out the front door every morning at 7:30 in a pressed blazer, while I was in the yard in my small room. In the kitchen, making coffee, telling myself things were uncomfortable but manageable. She had been on the phone with a real estate brokerage discussing how to clear me out of my own house. And I had been trimming the magnolia in the backyard without the faintest idea. "Douglas," Fletcher's voice cut through it. "I need to ask you something directly. Does anyone else have access to your financial accounts, any form of access at all?" "En mías and irruios. Caleb has a supplementary card on my household checking account." "Has Serena ever had any form of direct access, online credentials, phone authorization, anything you may have agreed to and forgotten about, and dries pop sending her radio?" "Nothing I set up." "That is not the same as nothing at all." Fletcher put his pen down flat on the desk, the gesture he used when he wanted someone to understand he was being completely serious. Someone willing to make 4 calls to a brokerage about selling a house she does not own is willing to make other moves she has no right to make. "I need you to go to your bank tomorrow morning, not online, in person. Ask to speak with a senior account representative. Tell them you are the account holder and you want a full internal access history for the past 6 months. Every login, every phone inquiry, every request for information or account modification made by anyone other than you. Can I see that through online banking? No, that level of internal log: who called, who asked what was requested, that only exists on their end. A teller can't pull it either. You need someone senior who can access the account activity system directly. He held my gaze. Can you be there when they open tomorrow? 8 o'clock. Good. He picked up his pen again and made a note. Then he set it back down and looked at me differently, not as a lawyer reviewing a case, but as a man who had known me for 15 years and was asking something that mattered. Before we go any further, he said, I want a straight answer to one question. What do you actually want here, Douglas? Not what you want stopped, not what you want investigated. What do you want? I looked at him. Then I looked past him out the window at the slice of Broad Street between the buildings. I want my house back, I said. What I do with it after that, I've had some thoughts about that for a while. How long is a while? Long enough that the answer doesn't surprise me anymore. Fletcher looked at me steadily. Then he nodded once, clean the nod that meant filed and understood, and we are not done with this. Go to the bank tomorrow, he said. Then come back and see me. We shook hands and I let myself out. Downstairs on Broad Street, I sat in my truck for a few minutes before starting the engine. I took out the small notebook I carry in my shirt pocket and looked at the single line I had written during the meeting. Bank, in person, tomorrow morning. 4 words. But sitting there in the quiet of a Monday afternoon, I had a feeling, the kind that comes from 40 years of reading structures before they fail, that what I was going to find inside that building tomorrow was not going to be what I was prepared for. Fletcher had been clear about one thing: this had to be done in person. Account access history. Who called? Who asked what changes were requested? None of that appeared in online banking or on a standard monthly statement. It lived inside the bank's internal systems, and the only way to see it was to sit across from someone who had the clearance to pull it up. I had been doing business at the First National Bank branch on Meeting Street for over 2 decades, and I had known Linda Howell for 12 years through the mortgage payoff, through Margaret's estate paperwork, through every financial decision that had mattered in my life. If there was something in those accounts that I needed to know about, Linda would show it to me straight. She always had. I walked through the front door at 10 o'clock Tuesday morning. Linda was at her desk across the floor. She looked up, and the moment she recognized me, her expression shifted. Not alarmed, just attentive. The way a person looks when someone they know well shows up somewhere they weren't expected. Mr. Mercer, she stood. I wasn't expecting to see you today. I need to go over a few things, Linda, in person. She heard something in the way I said it. 12 years of working together teaches people to read between the lines, and without another word, she gestured toward her private office. We sat down on either side of her desk. She turned to her screen. What do you need from me today? I need you to pull the internal access history on all my accounts, I said. The past 6 months, every login attempt, every phone inquiry, every request for information or account modification made by anyone other than me. Linda looked at me the way someone looks when they understand that a serious question is being asked, and they want to make sure they answer it correctly. Then she turned to her keyboard and began typing. The office was quiet. I sat with both hands flat on my knees and waited. She stopped typing. Douglas. She used my first name. In 12 years, she had almost always called me Mr. Mercer. That alone told me we were past the formal part of the conversation. September 14th. 6 weeks ago, there was a call to our customer service line. Tell me everything. Linda read directly from her screen, slowly and carefully, the way she read anything she wanted to get exactly right. A woman called and identified herself as, quote, the daughter-in-law and household manager of the account holder, end quote. She looked up. She requested the current account balance. She also asked about the process for adding a joint account holder to an existing account. I kept my voice completely level. What happened after that? She was denied. Linda turned the screen a fraction toward me so I could see the flagged entry for myself. She could not correctly answer the security verification questions. Those are the questions only the account holder of record would know. The date the account was opened, the amount of the last in-branch transaction, the secondary security phrase you set up years ago. She failed all three. Linda paused. The call was logged, marked as an irregular access attempt, and added to the file. Standard protocol for any unauthorized inquiry. How long was the call? Linda checked. 4 minutes and 31 seconds. 4.5 minutes of trying to get into my account. Not a wrong number, not a misunderstanding. A deliberate attempt that went on for 4.5 minutes before it was shut down. Print that log for me. The page came out of the printer beside her. She set it in front of me, and I read every line, the timestamp, the duration, the 3 failed verification attempts, and the notation at the bottom in red text, caller unable to verify identity. Access denied, flagged for file. I folded it once and set it to the side. Now, show me the last 6 months of transactions, I said. Everything in and out. Linda pulled up the full statement view and turned the monitor so I could see the complete screen. I went through it the way I used to go through a materials invoice on a job site, line by line. Nothing skipped, nothing assumed. The outgoing side was steady and consistent. Spa charges, restaurants I had never been to. Online retail purchases arriving at addresses I recognized. A salon on King Street. Charged twice in the same month each visit, costing more than my weekly groceries. Gas stations purchases on routes I never drove. All of it regular, all of it deliberate. All of it flowing out of the same account I had been maintaining for 18 months without question. And walk me through everything coming in, I said. Linda pointed to the deposit column. My pension arrived on the 1st of every month. My quarterly investment transfer. The rental income from my North Charleston property. Steady. Predictable, all mine. What about the second income? I asked. The direct deposit from an employer. Linda was quiet for a moment. Not long, just long enough that I knew what was coming before she said it. Mr. Mercer. Back to formal. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at me directly. The way a person does when they respect someone enough to deliver difficult information without softening it into something unrecognizable. The direct deposit from your daughter-in-law's employer stopped 4 months ago. The last payment came through on July 9th. I sat very still. 4 months, I said. Yes. And the spending. Did not stop. Linda glanced at the screen, once then back at me. In August, it actually increased slightly. I looked at the numbers on the monitor, column after column of outgoing charges steady as a drumbeat, not one of them pausing to account for the fact that the income funding them had disappeared in July. Serena had been out of work for 4 months. She had been leaving the house every morning dressed for an office she no longer went to. She had been charging spa visits and restaurant meals and King Street salon appointments to an account she had no legal standing to use, and the entire time Caleb had been handing over his paycheck without asking a single question because he had been trained since the beginning of their marriage not to ask questions. Linda, I said, I need to remove the supplementary card under the name Caleb Mercer today. Right now? Of course. She reached into her drawer and pulled out the authorization form. Without hesitation, set it on the desk and turned it to face me. I just need your signature. I picked up the pen. I read every line on the form. I always read everything before I sign anything. It is a habit 40 years in the trade instilled in me, and I have never broken it. Then I signed my name, wrote the date, and pushed it back across the desk. My hand did not shake once. Linda processed the form, printed a confirmation copy, and slid it across to me, along with the flagged call log. The card will be deactivated within the hour, she said. Good. I stood. Linda stood with me. She extended her hand across the desk, and when I shook it, she held it for just a moment longer than a standard handshake. I have known you for a long time, Douglas, she said quietly. You built half of what's good on this side of the city. You deserve a great deal better than what's been happening in that house. Thank you, Linda, I said. You've always been straight with me. I won't forget that. I folded both pages carefully, the call log and the statement, and slid them into the breast pocket of my shirt. Outside, on Meeting Street, I stopped on the sidewalk. 40 years in construction taught me one thing above everything else when you find a problem in the foundation. You do not panic and you do not rush. You assess the full extent of the damage. You take the time to understand exactly what you are dealing with, and then only then you make your decision. Repair what can be repaired, or tear it down to the ground and build something better. I pressed 2 fingers against the folded pages in my breast pocket. I called Fletcher from the sidewalk and left him a message the bank records were what he expected, and then some. He called back an hour later. "Good," he said. "Don't come in yet. Let me make some calls first. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. I had already made my decision. I got home before either of them that evening. I changed out of my button-down, went to the kitchen, and started cooking. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes. Green beans, the same meal I had made 100 times when Caleb was growing up, and it was just the 2 of us at this table. I set 3 plates, poured 3 glasses of water, folded the napkins the way Margaret always folded them, corners even. Because despite everything I had learned that morning, the flagged phone call, the 4 months of missing salary, the signed authorization form now sitting in my desk drawer, I was not ready to show my hand. Not yet, not tonight. I had 2 pages of evidence in my breast pocket and a meeting with Fletcher Crane scheduled for later in the week. What I did not have was everything, and in 40 years of building, I had learned never to make a move until the foundation was fully mapped. So I cooked dinner, I set the table, I waited. Caleb came through the door at 6:50 still, and his work shirt tie loosened. He dropped his keys on the entry table and walked into the kitchen, and his face did what it always did when he smelled a home-cooked meal. At the end of a long day, it relaxed just slightly like a man setting down something heavy. "Smells incredible, Dad." "Nothing special," I said. "Sit down." Serena came in a few minutes later, already changed into comfortable clothes, phone in hand. She glanced at the table, sat down, and went back to her screen without a word. The 3 of us ate. For a while, the only sounds were the scrape of silverware and the occasional clink of a glass being set down. Caleb talked briefly about traffic on the bridge. I asked if the chicken needed more salt. Serena said nothing. It was on the surface an ordinary Tuesday evening in an ordinary household. Then Serena set her phone face down on the table and looked at Caleb. "I need you to look over some paperwork this week," she said. Caleb finished chewing. "Sure. What kind of paperwork?" "Just some forms. I've marked where you need to sign. I'll walk you through it." "Okay." Caleb reached for his water glass. "Can it wait until the weekend?" "I'd rather it not." Her tone was pleasant the way it always was when she wanted something done on her timeline. "It won't take long. Just sign where I've marked." Caleb nodded and went back to his food. He did not ask what the forms were for. He did not ask why they needed to be signed before the weekend. He just nodded and ate his dinner. And I sat across from him watching it happen and keeping my face completely still. Then Serena picked up her phone again, scrolled for a moment, and said in exactly the same conversational tone she had used to discuss the paperwork, "Oh, I ran into someone from Hargrove Properties today, at the coffee place on King Street." I raised my head and looked at her. She was not looking at me. She was looking at her phone thumb, moving across the screen entirely at ease. "Interesting company," she continued. "They're doing a lot of work in this neighborhood right now. The whole street is appreciating like crazy." Caleb said, without looking up from his plate. I said, "Is that right?" Not a question. 2 words flat and even placed into the air and left there. Serena glanced up briefly. "Property values around here are insane compared to even 3 years ago. It's wild how much things have changed." "They have," I said. I picked up my napkin, pressed it to my mouth, and set it beside my plate. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm done. Thank you both for the company." I carried my plate to the kitchen, rinsed it in the sink, and stood at the counter for a moment with both hands resting on the edge of the basin. Outside the window, the side yard was dark and still. Behind me, I could hear Serena resuming whatever she had been doing on her phone. Caleb said something about the game on Thursday. Ordinary sounds. A completely ordinary evening. Except that I now knew exactly what the paperwork was. And I knew that by the time Caleb signed it, it would not matter. Because whatever Serena had drafted, it would carry the signature of a man with no legal ownership of anything at 114 Church Street. I was the only owner of record. I had been for 37 years. No signature Caleb put on any piece of paper in that dining room was going to change that. I went to my room and let the evening pass. At 9 o'clock, I walked back to the kitchen for a glass of water. The light in the dining room was still on. I passed the doorway without stopping, but something made me slow a sound, a shift in the air, and I looked through the gap between the door and the frame. Serena had spread 2 pages across the dining table. She was standing beside Caleb's chair, one hand resting on the back of it, pointing to the bottom of the first page. "Here," she said, "and here," and the last line on the second page. Caleb had a pen in his hand. He looked at the first page for about 2 seconds. "What is this again?" "Financial restructuring." Serena said, her voice smooth and patient, the voice she used when she had already decided how a conversation was going to end. "We talked about this Caleb." "Right." He bent over the page and signed, turned to the second, signed again, found the last line, and signed a third time without reading a single word between the first signature and the last. I watched for 3 seconds, then I turned and walked back to my room. I sat down at the small desk by the window, reached into the bottom drawer, and pulled out the leather notebook I had kept since my first year in the trade. 40 years of names, numbers, addresses, every contact that had ever mattered to me, professionally or personally, written in the same blue pen in the same careful hand. I turned the pages slowly, past suppliers who had retired, past foremen whose numbers I no longer needed, past job sites and project managers and building inspectors and the names of men I had worked beside in weather both good and punishing. I stopped at one page near the back, one name, one phone number written so many times in my memory over the years that I could have dialed it in the dark. I had not called it in 3 years, not since the last job we had worked together, a renovation on Sullivan's Island that had run 6 weeks over schedule and still turned out right in the end. I looked at the clock on the nightstand, 9:30, a little late to be calling someone on a Tuesday night. But Wendell Pruitt had been in the moving business for 30 years, and in all the time I had known him. He had never once complained about a call coming in after hours. He always said the same thing when I asked if it was a bad time. He said, "For you, Doug, never." I picked up my phone. I went out to the front porch and sat down in the old wooden chair I had built myself 20 years ago from leftover pine boards. The street was quiet. The lights inside the house had gone dark one by one. Over the past hour, first the kitchen, then the hallway, then the thin strip under the master bedroom door. The house was asleep. I was not. I had been sitting with one thought since I walked away from the dining room doorway, since I watched Caleb sign 3 pages of paperwork without reading a single word, while Serena stood beside his chair, directing him like a foreman, pointing at a form. That image had followed me down the hall and into my room and back out here onto the porch, and it had not softened in the hour since. I looked at the phone in my hand. I found the number. I pressed call. 2 rings. Doug. Wendell Pruitt's voice came through thick and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been winding down for the evening. "It's nearly 10 o'clock. I know what time it is, Wendell. I need your biggest truck." A short pause. "How big are we talking?" "Everything of mine in a 4-bedroom house. 1 trip." Another pause, longer this time. I heard the distinct sound of a glass being set down on a hard surface. "Doug, you sure about this?" "I built every piece of furniture in that house by hand, Wendell. I know exactly what I'm moving and exactly where it's going. I'm sure." Silence stretched for 3 or 4 seconds. Then Wendell exhaled the long, slow breath of a man recalibrating his Wednesday. "Listen, Harbo, 7 a.m. 7 a.m. sharp. I can bring Dylan Sawyer and Reese. Good boys, all 3. They know how to work without making a scene. That's exactly what I need." Another beat. Then, "Do the people in the house know you're doing this?" I looked out at the empty street. A dog barked once somewhere down the block and went quiet. "They will," I said. Wendell let out a short sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Something between the two that only a man who has known you for 30 years can produce. "All right, Doug, we'll be there. 7 on the dot." "Thank you, Wendell." "Don't thank me yet. Buy me a beer after." I ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in my lap. Then I opened my contacts, found Fletcher Crane, and pressed call. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, which was what I expected at 9:50 on a Tuesday night. Fletcher's outgoing message was exactly what you would expect from the man. His name, his firm, his number, and nothing else. I waited for the tone. Fletcher, it's Douglas. Tomorrow morning, Wednesday, I'm moving my belongings out of the house. The truck arrives at 7. I need you to have the full property file, ready deed of ownership, account documentation, everything we have on Hargrove, the access log from the bank. All of it organized and in one place. I paused. One more thing. I mentioned I had plans for the property long term. I need you to reach out to a real estate contact, someone you trust, about what a transaction at this address might realistically look like. I'll explain the full picture when I see you Thursday. I paused again. I'll be at your office at 10. And I ended the call. I sat on the porch for another hour. Not because I was uncertain I had not been uncertain, since I walked away from that dining room doorway. I sat because the house was quiet and I was not ready to go back inside it yet. There was something about sitting out here in the dark, in the chair I had built with wood, left over from the back bedroom addition. On the porch I had laid the boards of myself, something that felt right about being still for a moment before everything changed. At 11, I went inside, washed up, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in 2 weeks. Wednesday morning, I was up at 5:15. I made coffee, stood in the kitchen, and looked at the room the way you look at something you built, when you know you were seeing it for the last time in its current form. The cabinets I had installed in 2004. The tile I had laid myself over a long weekend while Margaret read to me from the porch. The window above the sink that I had reframed 3 years ago when the original frame started to show moisture. I knew every joint and seam and corner of this kitchen. I had built all of it. At 6:20, I heard Caleb's alarm go off down the hall. At 6:30, he appeared in the kitchen doorway in his work clothes, knotting his tie with the distracted efficiency of a man who has done it 10,000 times. He looked up and saw me at the counter with my coffee. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, son." He pulled open the refrigerator, grabbed the orange juice, poured a glass, drank it standing up, set the glass in the sink, checked his phone. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep much." He nodded the way people nod when they hear something without really processing it. He picked up his keys from the hook by the door, the same hook I had installed the year the house was finished, and glanced back once. "Have a good day," he said. "You too, son." The door closed behind him. His car started in the driveway and pulled away. I watched the taillights disappear down Church Street. I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, rinsed the mug, and set it upside down on the drying rack. Then I went to my room and began pulling the boxes out from the back of the closet, the ones I had quietly packed over the past 2 evenings, while the house was occupied with its own business. Books, tools, the photographs from the wall above the small desk, the leather notebook, Margaret's things that I had kept in the bottom drawer of the dresser for 5 years. At 7 o'clock exactly, I heard the rumble of a large engine coming down Church Street. I walked to the front door and opened it. Wendell Pruitt's truck was rolling to a stop at the curb, a full-size moving truck, white with blue lettering, along the side, Pruitt Moving and Storage. Behind it, a second vehicle pulled in Wendell's own pickup, which meant he had come himself instead of just sending the crew. Wendell stepped out of the cab, stretched his arms over his head, and looked up at the front face of the house the way a man looks at something he respects. Then he looked at me on the porch and gave a single nod. In 15 minutes, Serena would come out of the master bedroom in her blazer and heels, pick up her bag, and walk out the front door toward whatever fiction she had constructed to fill her days. I would say good morning the way I always did. She would say something brief and go to her car. And then Wendell and his crew would walk through that front door, and we would begin. Before I tell you what happened the morning that truck pulled up, comment the number 8 right now, so I know you're still here. Because what Serena did when she saw those 3 pages is something I didn't expect, not even from her. A reminder what follows includes some fictional elements shaped for storytelling purposes. If that's not what you came for, this is a good place to stop. For everyone staying, let's keep going. By 7:15, Dylan and Sawyer had already moved the bookcase from the hallway and were working on the oak cabinet in the living room, the one I had built in the winter of 1993 from reclaimed heart pine. the wood Margaret had picked out herself from a salvage yard on James Island. Reese was in the back bedroom, wrapping the frame photographs in moving paper with the careful efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. I was standing in the middle of the living room with a clipboard going through the inventory list when I heard the footsteps in the hallway. Serena stopped at the edge of the living room. She was still in her robe hair, not yet done, phone in one hand. She looked at Dylan and Sawyer. She looked at the gap in the wall where the cabinet had stood for 30 years. She looked at me. "What is going on in here?" "Good morning, Serena." "What are you—" She took 2 steps into the room, her voice sharpening. "What is he doing in my house? Who authorized this?" "This is my house," I said. "I don't need authorization." "You can't just—" She swept her hand at the room voice climbing. "You can't walk in here and start taking things without— This is our home. There are people living here. You can't just—" "I'm moving my belongings," I said. "Every item on this list is mine. I built most of it with my own hands. The rest I purchased before your name was ever associated with this address. I'm calling the police." She already had her phone raised. "This is harassment. This is you're disturbing our home, and I will have you removed." "Go ahead." 2 words, flat and even. She stopped. I set the clipboard down on the side table, reached into my breast pocket, and took out 3 pages folded once. I set them on the surface of the living room table, the table I had also built, also by hand, also from heart pine, and stepped back. "While you wait for them to arrive," I said, "you might want to read those." Serena looked at the 3 pages. She did not pick them up immediately. In the hallway, I heard Reese's movements go quiet. I waited. She picked up the first page. "If that one is the deed of ownership for 114 Church Street," I said. "My name, recorded in 1987, never amended, never transferred, never signed over to anyone. Not a single modification in 37 years. She set it down and picked up the second. "And that one is the internal access log from First National Bank. September 14th of this year. A woman who identified herself as the household manager of the account holder called the customer service line, requested the current account balance, and asked about the process for adding a joint account holder. She failed all 3 security verification questions. The call was logged flagged as an unauthorized access attempt and added to the file. Duration 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Serena had gone very still. She picked up the 3rd page. That one is from Hargrove Properties on King Street. 4 contacts between mid-July and early September. A woman who identified herself as a family representative for the Church Street property. She discussed current market valuation, potential listing timelines, and I'm quoting their agent's written notes, removing the obstacle of the current occupant. I let that sit for a moment. Their agent declined to proceed because she had no documentation proving any right to represent the property. The contacts are on file. The room was completely silent. Serena read the 3rd page to the end. Then she set it down on top of the other 2, slowly, carefully. The way you set something down when you are thinking about something else entirely. She looked up at me. It was not the look of a woman who was angry. It was not the look of a woman who was going to cry or argue or explain herself. It was the look of a woman running a very fast calculation behind very still eyes and arriving at a number she did not like. The police," I said. "Are they still coming?" She did not answer. She stood there for 3 more seconds. Then she turned and walked back down the hallway toward the master bedroom. The door closed behind her, not slammed, just closed. That told me more than a slam would have. Wendell stepped in from the front doorway where he had been standing close enough to hear everything and far enough to stay out of it. He came and stood beside me looking at the hallway. "Why, she didn't call them," he said low. "No. You knew she wouldn't." "I knew she wouldn't." Wendell was quiet for a moment. Then, "How did you know?" "Because calling the police means putting everything in a public record. It means a responding officer reads those 3 pages. It means questions she doesn't want to answer in front of a badge." I picked up my clipboard. "People with something to hide don't invite scrutiny. They retreat and regroup." Wendell looked at the 3 pages still on the table. "What do you think she does next?" "She calls a lawyer," I said. "Before noon. Dylan appeared in the doorway from the dining room, waiting for instruction. I nodded toward the side table, a smaller piece, 2 drawers built the same year as the cabinet. He moved toward it without a word. The house filled again with the sounds of careful, methodical work. Exactly 3 minutes later, I know, because I was looking at my watch when it happened, the master bedroom door opened again. Serena came out in her clothes blazer on bag over her shoulder, keys in her right hand. She walked down the hallway at a measured pace, past the living room where I was standing, past the table with the 3 pages still on it. She did not look at me. She did not look at the pages. She did not look at Wendell or Dylan or the gap in the wall where her favorite cabinet had stood. She walked straight to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. The door closed behind her with the same quiet precision as the bedroom door, controlled, deliberate, giving nothing away. Wendell and I listened to her car start in the driveway. We listened to it back out and pull away down Church Street. We listened until the sound was gone. Then Wendell looked at me and said, 37 years you built this house. Yes. And that's all it took. He nodded at the 3 pages on the table. 3 pieces of paper. I picked up the clipboard again and found my place on the inventory list. It wasn't the paper, I said. It was what was on it. Wendell was quiet for a moment. Then he went back to work. I was sitting in the parking lot of a hardware store on Morrison Drive when my phone rang. I had been there for about 20 minutes, engine off, windows down the afternoon, settling around me in the particular way it does after a morning that takes everything you have. The truck was backed into a space near the far end of the lot, away from the entrance, away from the steady in and out of people buying ordinary things for ordinary projects. I had needed somewhere to put the truck that wasn't home, and wasn't Fletcher's office, and wasn't anywhere that required me to be anything other than a man sitting quietly with the weight of a long day. The screen lit up. Caleb's name. I picked up on the second ring. Dad. His voice came in, already moving already, somewhere between confused and something rawer that he hadn't named yet. Dad, where are you? I just got home and... A pause. The specific pause of a person who has walked into a room and found it rearranged by someone else's decision. Your things aren't in the living room. Your office, the shelves are empty. The cabinet by the window is gone. I know, I said. I moved everything out this morning. You moved? He stopped. Why? What is going on? Serena called me this afternoon and she said, what did she say? A shorter pause this time. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped slower, more careful, like a man stepping onto ground he wasn't sure about. She said you weren't doing well, that you might need to be. He stopped again. I could hear him working out how to say it. Evaluated. She used the word evaluated. I let that sit between us for a full 3 seconds. Evaluated, I said. Hey, Dad, I don't believe her. I want you to know that. I don't know what's happening, and I need you to explain it to me. Caleb, where are you right now? I'm standing on the front porch. Sit down on the steps, I said. I have something to tell you. Not everything tonight, just enough for you to understand what you signed last Tuesday. A long silence. Then I heard it, the familiar creak of the second porch step, the one that had always sounded like that, the one Margaret used to say she liked, because it meant someone was coming home. 35 years that step had made that sound, and I had never once fixed it. Okay, Caleb said quietly. I'm sitting. Go ahead. I told him about Patricia first, the backyard on Saturday afternoon, her crouching below the fence line, Serena in the far corner, behind the rose bushes, phone to her ear. Not knowing anyone could hear, the name Hargrove Properties. I kept it in order, and kept it short, the way I used to run a job briefing when I needed men to understand a situation fast and act on it clearly. No editorializing, just what happened and when, and what it meant. When I finished, Caleb was quiet. How long have you known about Hargrove? He asked. It's since Saturday. Patricia came to the fence while I was trimming the magnolia. She didn't want to say anything. She went back and forth about it all week. But she decided I had a right to know. Patricia Sims has lived next door for 11 years, Caleb said, more to himself than to me. She has, and she wasn't trying to listen, but once she heard it, she couldn't put it back. The line went quiet again, not empty, just full of something that hadn't found its way into words yet. Then Caleb said, the paper's Tuesday night. She told me it was financial restructuring. She said we had talked about it. It wasn't restructuring, I said. It was a financial power of attorney. You gave her full legal authority to handle any asset held in your name, any bank account, any transaction, any financial decision, everything in your name became hers to act on. I paused. The reason it doesn't touch my house is that my house has never been in your name. I am the sole owner of record. I have been since 1987. Whatever she was building with that document, she needed your name as a bridge to get to mine. It didn't work, but she tried. The breath that came through the phone then was long and slow and heavy. In a way, I recognized the sound of a person letting go of something they had been holding without knowing they were holding it. She used me like a blank page, he said. I didn't say anything. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be said out loud and heard by someone who won't argue with them. How long have you known? He asked. His voice had changed again, quieter, more hollowed out. Not just Hargrove, all of it. How long have you actually known? Long enough? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed evidence, I said. Not to beat her in an argument, not to make you choose sides over a story I couldn't prove. I needed you to have documents in your hands, real documents. From a bank, from a real estate company, reviewed by a real attorney, so that when I put them in front of you, there was nothing to argue with. I let that settle. If I had called you last Saturday and said Patricia overheard Serena on the phone talking about selling my house, what would you have done? A pause. I would have asked Serena about it, he said, and she would have had an answer. She always has an answer ready. Yeah, a single word, flat and tired and honest. Yeah, she does. A car passed on Church Street behind him, someone else's ordinary Wednesday, going somewhere simple and uncomplicated. What do you need me to do? He asked. Nothing tonight, but there's one thing I want to ask you first. I looked out through the windshield at the hardware store entrance. Serena's salary stopped 4 months ago. July 9th, the direct deposit from her employer, it stopped, and it never came back. Did you know that? The silence that followed was longer than the others, long enough that I counted it. 5 seconds, 6, 7. She told me she was on extended paid leave, he said. His voice had gone completely flat. The kind of flat that comes when something hits in exactly the place a person didn't know was unprotected. And did you verify that? 1 beat. No. I know, son. More silence. Then Caleb said very quietly, she's been spending money for 4 months with no income coming in. Out of the household account. Yes. And I handed her my paycheck every month and never once looked at where it was going. I didn't confirm it. He didn't need me to. Dad? His voice had dropped to something private, the voice of a man working through something alone, even with someone on the line. You did all of this by yourself. That was my decision. I should have seen it. I thought about the photograph on my nightstand, the 10-year-old with the hammer that was too big for him, the nail-driven flush on the 3rd try, the way he had looked up. You saw it, I said. You just chose not to look at it directly. There's a difference. The line went quiet for a long moment. I know, Caleb said. Low and private the way a confession sounds when it's made to yourself as much as to anyone else. I know? Don't call her tonight, I said. Don't text her. Don't ask her anything. Just sit with what I told you. What do you think she's going to do? May have she already called a lawyer, I said. Before noon today? I'm certain of it. What kind of lawyer? The kind that knows what she was trying to do and knows how to make it look like something else. I paused. But we know what she was doing, too. And we have the documents to prove it. A long, slow exhale on his end of the line. Get some sleep, son, I said. Yeah. He didn't sound convinced. You too, Dad. I ended the call and sat in the parking lot a while longer, watching the last few customers come and go, watching the light change over the roof of the building, watching the ordinary end of an ordinary day for everyone who wasn't sitting in this particular truck with this particular weight on their chest. Then I started the engine, and I drove. I had told Fletcher I would be at his office by 9. I was there at 8:55. His secretary waved me through without the usual pause, which told me Fletcher had already told her to send me straight in. That alone told me something was waiting. Fletcher was at his desk when I walked in. He was not reading. He was not writing. He was sitting with both hands flat on the desk, looking at a white envelope in the center of the blotter, with the particular stillness of a man who has already opened it, read it, processed it, and is now waiting to deliver it. He looked up when I came in. "Sit down, Douglas." I sat. He picked up the envelope and placed it in front of me. The return address was a law office on Rutledge Avenue. The name above it read, Raymond Voss, Attorney at Law. "That arrived this morning," Fletcher said. "Hand-delivered, 7:45. "I don't know that name." "You should." Fletcher opened his legal pad to a fresh page. Raymond Voss has handled 6 major property disputes in Charleston in the past 5 years. He won 4 of them. He is not a name you want on the other side of a letter. He paused. "Serena retained him yesterday, before noon." I looked at him. "You said before noon. Courier timestamp, 11:53. I thought about sitting in the parking lot on Morrison Drive, Caleb's voice on the phone, the porch steps creaking. All of that had been happening while Serena was already in a law office on Rutledge Avenue, sitting across from Raymond Voss, laying out her version of events. What does the letter say? Fletcher opened it and read directly from the page, not summarizing reading. Voss argues that Caleb Mercer, as the biological son of the property owner, has established residency rights at 114 Church Street through 18 months of continuous uninterrupted occupation. He further argues that your removal of personal belongings from the property without prior written notice to the occupants constitutes a violation of South Carolina residential occupancy statute and may be construed as an act of harassment under civil law. "Is that a real argument?" "It is a real argument," Fletcher said, and he said it the way a surgeon describes a complication without alarm, but without minimizing it either. Under South Carolina law, a person who has resided continuously at a property for more than 12 months without a formal lease is classified as a tenant at will. That is a legal status. It means they have month-to-month occupancy rights, and the property owner is required to give 30 days written notice before any eviction can proceed. I haven't given that notice. You haven't, which means technically as of yesterday morning, you were in violation. He held up one hand. Technically? The exposure is minimal because you didn't remove their belongings, only yours. But Voss is using it to establish that you acted improperly, which sets a tone he can use in front of a judge. So what do? We fix it today. Fletcher picked up his pen. I'm drafting the 30-day notice of termination of tenancy right now. It goes out certified mail this afternoon to Serena Mercer and Caleb Mercer, both names at 114 Church Street. The moment they sign for it, the clock starts. 30 days from that signature, they are required by law to vacate the premises. And if they don't, then we file for formal eviction, and it becomes a court matter, but it won't come to that. Fletcher set the pen down. Because Voss has something else in this letter. I waited. Fletcher looked at me steadily. He suggests that Serena has documentation showing you voluntarily transferred occupancy rights to her in writing, signed by you. The room went very quiet. There is no such document, I said. I know that. I have never signed anything transferring occupancy or any other right to Serena Mercer. Not in 18 months, not ever. I know that too. Fletcher kept his voice level and his eyes on mine. But if that document exists even as a fabrication, it changes the posture of this case significantly. A forged document with a convincing signature is harder to dismiss than a verbal denial, especially in a preliminary hearing before a judge who hasn't seen the full file yet. That's sick. I looked at him. Then she just crossed from civil maneuvering into a criminal act. Yes? Fletcher said it simply without emphasis. If that document is a forgery, and based on what you've told me, it cannot be anything else, then we are no longer talking about a property dispute. We are talking about document fraud. That is a felony under South Carolina law. It carries up to 10 years and a $10,000 fine. I sat with that for a moment. She knows that, I said. She does, which means she's calculated that the risk of using a forged document is worth it, because she believes she can make it look real enough to buy time force a settlement, or at minimum make this expensive and exhausting enough that you consider walking away. Fletcher leaned forward slightly. That is the play, Douglas, not to win. To make it cost more than it's worth to fight. She miscalculated. She did. He picked up his pen again. Because she doesn't know what I know about you. I looked out the window at Broad Street below the courthouse corner, visible at the end of the block. The same corner I had looked at from this window 15 years ago when I came here to transfer the deed on a house I had finally finished paying for. What's our position? I said. Strong, Fletcher said without hesitation. You are the sole owner of record. There is no legitimate document transferring any right to Serena Mercer. We have the Hargrove file, the bank access log, and the deed. Once I send the 30-day notice today, the legal process is formally initiated, and Voss has to respond on our timeline, not his. He paused. And when that forged document surfaces, and it will surface because Voss has already signaled it, we will be ready for it. How ready? I have a forensic document analyst I have used twice before. She's done expert witness work for the county. If that document is a forgery, she will find it in the paper, the ink case, the print registration things that look right to the naked eye but don't survive a laboratory. Fletcher closed his legal pad. Serena knows the law, Douglas, or Voss does. But knowing the law and being right are not the same thing. We are right, and we have the documents to prove it. I nodded once. And send the notice, I said. It goes out this afternoon. Fletcher stood, which meant we were done for now. Come back this afternoon at 3. By then, I'll have the forensic analyst working, and I'll know more about what Voss actually has. Once ein Bingston Dwight. We shook hands. I walked out into the hallway and down the stairs and back out onto Broad Street. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of Charleston fall day that makes you remember why people have been living here for 300 years. Serena had moved fast, faster than I expected if I was being honest with myself. But fast and prepared were not the same thing either. I had been building things that lasted for 40 years. I knew the difference between a structure that looked solid and a structure that actually was. Hers was one, mine was the other. I was back in Fletcher's office at 3 that afternoon. He was already at his desk when I walked in. No greeting, no small talk, just a single gesture toward the chair across from him, and then his eyes back on the page in front of him. I had known Fletcher Crane for 15 years. When he skipped the greeting, it meant the thing on the desk was more important than courtesy. I sat down. In the center of his blotter was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy, not an original. He pushed it across to me without a word. I picked it up. The header read, Residential Occupancy Agreement. Below it, a block of formal language establishing the terms of occupancy at 114 Church Street, Charleston, South Carolina. The date at the top right corner, March 18th, 2023, a Monday, according to the document. And at the bottom of the page on the signature line, designated for the property owner of record, was my name, written in my hand. In my particular signature, the one I had used for 40 years, the slightly compressed D, the long horizontal stroke through the double G at the end. I set the page down on the desk. I never signed this, I said. I know. Fletcher watched me. Look at it again. Take your time. Is there anything on that page that strikes you as wrong, not the signature or anything else? I picked it up again and read it the way I read a set of blueprints methodically top to bottom, not skipping anything, because something looked familiar. The language was formal and credible. The formatting was clean. Someone had put real effort into making it look like the kind of document an attorney might draft. I stopped at the date. March 18th, 2023, I said. The document says it was signed on a Monday. Yes. March 18th, 2023 was a Saturday. Fletcher's pen came up from the legal pad. You're certain? I'm certain. It was Bill Rafferty's birthday. We had lunch together at a place in Mount Pleasant, the two of us and his son. I remember it specifically because it was the first time I had seen Bill since Christmas, and he looked thin. I was thinking about it on the drive home. I set the page down. Nobody signs real estate paperwork on a friend's birthday lunch. I would remember. Fletcher wrote 2 lines on his legal pad, underlined one of them, and circled the other. Then he looked up. "Good," he said. "That is very good. A witness who can place you somewhere else on the date in question is more useful than any technical analysis." He reached into the folder beside his blotter and removed a thin stapled report. "But we have the technical analysis too." He placed the report on top of the photocopy and slid it toward me. "Our forensic document analyst worked through the night," he said. "She has done expert witness work for Charleston County on 3 previous occasions. Her findings will hold up in court." I looked at the cover page, the analyst's name, her credentials, the date of the report. Then I opened it. Fletcher saved me the time of reading through the technical language. "If the signature is yours," he said. I looked up. "The signature is genuine, your actual handwriting, your actual ink deposited at some point in the past. But the document surrounding it was created significantly later." He tapped the 3rd paragraph of the report. "Ink age analysis. The signature ink shows oxidation levels consistent with a document created approximately 2 years ago. The printed text of the agreement shows oxidation levels consistent with something printed within the last 6 months. Minimum differential 3 months, more likely closer to 5. He paused. "As someone removed your signature from another document, physically or digitally, and built this agreement around it." The room was quiet for a moment. "Where did she get my signature?" I said. Fletcher set his pen down flat on the desk, the gesture I had come to recognize over 15 years as his way of saying, "What I am about to tell you is significant, and I need you to hear it clearly. We believe it came from a patient intake form at your doctor's office, April 2023, 1 month after the date on the forged agreement, which is consistent with the ink age differential." He looked at me steadily. "You had a routine physical that month. Serena accompanied you." The silence that followed was different from the others, heavier. "I asked her to come," I said. "Margaret used to come with me to appointments. After she passed, I went alone for 2 years. When Serena offered, I stopped. I thought it was a kind gesture." "I know," Fletcher said. His voice carried no judgment, not a trace of it. Just the clean, steady tone of a man who had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by any of it, and who understood that being right and being hurt were not mutually exclusive. "I want you to understand something, Douglas. What she did required planning. She had to identify a document with your signature that she could access. She had to remove or replicate that signature in a way that would survive casual inspection. She had to construct a credible legal document around it. And she had to wait for the right moment to deploy it." He paused. "This was not improvised. This was prepared months in advance, possibly before she ever moved into your house." I sat with that. "What does this mean legally?" I said. "It means we are no longer in a civil dispute about occupancy rights." Fletcher picked up his pen again. "Document forgery is a felony under South Carolina Code, Section 161310. Maximum sentence 10 years. Fine up to $10,000. The moment Voss filed that document with me as evidentiary support for his client's position, he either knowingly submitted a forged document, which is its own serious problem for him, or he was deceived by his own client, which is a different but equally significant problem." Fletcher looked at me with the same expression he had worn 15 years ago when he told me my house was finally paid for and fully mine. "We are not on defense anymore, Douglas. We are on offense." I nodded once. Then, "What happens to Caleb if we pursue criminal charges?" Fletcher stopped writing. He looked up and held my gaze for a moment before answering the pause of a man choosing his words with care. "That is exactly the right question," he said. "I know it's the right question. I'm asking for the answer." Caleb had no knowledge of the forged document. He did not participate in its creation. He did not submit it or authorize its submission. Fletcher set his pen down again. "If he is willing to state that, clearly under oath if necessary, and if he cooperates with the process, he carries no legal exposure. None." A pause. "But you need to tell him what we found before we take another step. He deserves to hear it from you, not from a court filing." I looked at the forged page on the desk. My signature at the bottom, my hand, my name attached to something I had never agreed to never read, never been in the same room as until this morning. "I'll talk to him today," I said. Fletcher nodded. "Bring him in tomorrow. I want to meet him." I stood. Fletcher stood with me. "Douglas." He held out his hand. "She made a serious mistake the moment she put your name on that page." I shook it. She made her first mistake. I said, "The morning she walked into my house and didn't say good morning." The corner table at the Queen Street Cafe was the kind of place where nobody looked twice. I had chosen it deliberately, 2 chairs facing each other, a window to one side, no one seated nearby. I arrived 20 minutes early. I ordered coffee, didn't touch it. Caleb walked in at 3:47. He spotted me, immediately crossed the room, and sat down without taking off his jacket. "You called me here like it was a job interview," Caleb said. "Sit down first." Caleb sat. I slid a thin manila folder across the table. No explanation, no preamble. "What is this?" "Everything I know, from the beginning to now." I leaned back slightly. "Read it. I'm not in a hurry." Caleb opened the folder. He didn't speak. The cafe moved around us. A barista called out an order. A chair scraped the floor somewhere behind us, but at our table, there was only silence and the slow turn of pages. 12 minutes passed. Caleb turned, a page, paused, turned back. He read the Hargrove Properties record a second time. His eyes stopped on a single line. I didn't need to ask which one. I'd read that line myself a dozen times since Saturday. Removing the obstacle of the current occupant, Caleb kept reading. He reached the forensic signature report, read the summary paragraph, then set the folder down on the table and looked out the window for a long moment. She used me like a blank sheet of paper. I said nothing. Caleb turned back from the window. "I signed those papers without reading them. I didn't even ask why they needed to be signed before the weekend." He shook his head slowly. "I knew what she was doing, controlling the money, controlling the information. I knew it from the start. He stopped. "I never thought she'd go this far." The cafe noise seemed to drop away entirely. Caleb pressed both palms flat on the table. "How long have you known, really?" "I've had suspicions for a while," I said. "I was certain by last week." Last week." Caleb didn't say it like a question. He said it like something he was testing the weight of. "And you still cooked dinner? You still sat at the same table? You didn't say a word." I needed evidence, not to beat her. I paused. "But so that when I showed you, you couldn't walk it back." Caleb looked at me directly for the first time since he'd sat down. His voice dropped. "You did all of this alone. That was my decision. I should have seen it sooner." "You saw it." My voice was quiet, not unkind. "You just chose not to look straight at it." The words landed between us like something dropped from a height. No anger in them, no accusation, just the flat, undeniable weight of the truth. Caleb didn't deny it. He looked down at the folder, then back up. "I kept thinking it would even out," he said finally. "That maybe I was being unfair to her. That if I stayed out of her way, things would settle." They don't settle," I said. "They compound." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did Fletcher Crane know before I did?" "Fletcher has known since Monday." That landed too. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose. "All right." The words sat there between us, not a surrender, but a turning point. "And what do you need me to do?" Caleb asked. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and produced a folded sheet of paper. I placed it in front of Caleb without unfolding it. "That's a revocation statement. You sign it, it nullifies the financial power of attorney. You sign Tuesday night completely with immediate legal effect." I kept my voice even. "On top of that, you need to be prepared to testify that you had no knowledge of the forged signature, that you signed the original document in good faith and under no understanding of its intended use." Caleb picked up the paper. He unfolded it carefully. He read it not skimming, not scanning, but reading every line, every clause, every defined term. I watched him without rushing, without prompting. It took 4 minutes. When Caleb put the paper down, something in his expression had changed, not dramatically, not visibly enough that a stranger would notice, but I noticed. The particular set of the jaw. The way he used to look after finishing a task he'd done properly and knew it. At this time, I'm reading before I sign, Caleb said. I can see that. Caleb picked up the pen I had placed beside the folder. He signed on the line, dated it, and set the pen down. What else do you need? I folded the signed revocation and placed it back in my jacket pocket. I picked up my coffee still warm enough and took one slow sip before answering. There's someone I want you to meet, I said. His name is Fletcher Crane. Caleb looked at me steadily. When? Tomorrow morning. His office is on Broad Street. I set the cup down. He'll have questions. Answer them the same way you just read that paper, carefully and completely. Caleb nodded once. He reached for the folder, closed it, and slid it back across the table to me. I'll be there, he said. I tucked the folder under my arm. I left the coffee half finished on the table. We walked out of the cafe together, not side by side, not yet, but close enough that the gap between us felt noticeably smaller than it had an hour ago. Outside on Queen Street, the late afternoon light cut low across the pavement. Caleb stopped at the sidewalk. Dad! I turned. Thank you for not giving up on me. I looked at my son for a moment, at the tiredness behind his eyes, at the particular way a person looks when they've just set something heavy down. You're my son, I said simply. That was never a question. I turned and walked toward my car. Caleb stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, then turned and walked the other way. Tomorrow, Fletcher Crane, and whatever came after that. The knock came at 8 o'clock exactly. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and a legal pad in front of me, going through notes Fletcher had sent over that afternoon. I wasn't reading them anymore. I was just sitting with them, holding them the way you hold something, when you've already absorbed everything useful from it, and you're simply not ready to put it down yet. I opened the door and found Earl Davenport standing on the porch hat in both hands, turning it slowly by the brim. The porch light caught the deep lines in the old man's face lines I had watched accumulate over 20 years of neighboring, of brief conversations across the fence, of nods and waves and the occasional longer exchange over the garden gate. I had known Earl for 2 decades and had never once seen him hold his hat like that, the particular way a man holds something when he's carrying words he has been waiting a long time to say out loud. Earl, come in. Thank you. He stepped inside, quietly glanced around the front room, sparse now quieter than it had been in months. The kind of quiet a room holds after it has had things removed from it, and settled himself in the armchair near the window. He placed the hat carefully on his knee. I won't be long. I just needed to say this before tomorrow morning. I sat down across from him and waited. Earl folded both hands over the hat. 3 months ago, July, I was in my front room near the window that looks directly across to your place. Your office door was open just a crack. No more than that, but open. I saw Serena in there. He paused, choosing his words carefully. She was photographing something inside your filing cabinet with her phone, bottom drawer. She was going through the papers methodically, not in a hurry, photographing each one before moving to the next. I kept my face still. Are you certain about what you saw? At the time, I wasn't completely certain, Earl said. The light wasn't ideal, and I told myself there could be a reasonable explanation for it, that maybe she was looking for something you'd asked her to find, or that it was none of my business either way. He looked at me directly. That's why I said what I said that morning on your porch when you asked me whether there was something I wanted to tell you. I said not yet, because I wasn't ready to say something I wasn't fully sure of. His eyes held mine. I'm sure now, and I'm prepared to say it under oath in open court, with Raymond Voss sitting across the room from me. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Earl, I need you to understand what that means before you commit to it. You'll be called as a witness in a civil hearing. The attorney on the other side will question you at length. He's good at his work, and his job is to find inconsistencies. He'll press you on the quality of the light. He'll ask about the distance between your window and mine, the angle of your sight line, whether you were wearing glasses. He'll ask how long you watched and why, and whether you considered at the time that what you were doing was itself a form of surveillance. Earl absorbed all of that without flinching. I'm 70 years old, Doug, he said. His voice was level, unhurried, entirely without defensiveness. I've given testimony once in my life, a traffic accident on Rutledge Street, 1987. A young man was trying to say the other driver had run the red light. I was the only one who had been standing at the right angle to see what actually happened. I told the truth then. He set the hat aside on the arm of the chair, freeing both hands. I'll tell the truth tomorrow. The room sat quiet for a moment. Tell me exactly what you saw, I said. Walk me through it. Earl straightened. I saw Serena open the bottom drawer of your filing cabinet. She had her phone held up in front of her. The screen was lit and she was moving through the papers one at a time, photographing each page before she moved on to the next. She was not rushing. She knew what she was looking for, or she was making sure she had everything regardless. She was in that room for at least 8 minutes. I watched because something felt wrong. I couldn't have said then what was wrong or why, but something felt wrong and I kept watching. I nodded slowly. I picked up my pen, wrote 2 lines on the legal pad, and set it down again. Is there anything else? I asked. Take your time. Earl reached for his hat on the arm of the chair, then stopped himself deliberately. There is, he said. There's the other thing. He sat forward slightly. August. Late afternoon, a Tuesday, I believe. Serena stopped me in the front yard while I was checking the mailbox. She asked about property values on the street, said it casually. In the way you bring something up, when you want it to sound like it just occurred to you. I didn't think much of it. At first, it's a street people ask about. He paused. But then she said something that I haven't been able to put down since. She said, the family is thinking about restructuring the property arrangement. We want to understand the market. The room went very still. That sentence bothered me, Earl said. I couldn't explain why at the time. I kept turning it over for days afterward and couldn't tell you exactly what was wrong with it. Not until last week. And when I heard about the Hargrove business from Patricia, he looked at me. Then I understood what she'd been doing when she said it. Now you understand, I said. Now I understand completely. Earl stood up, picked up his hat, and held it at his side. He was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. I should have come to you sooner, Doug. I've been sitting on both of those things for months, telling myself I wasn't certain enough that it wasn't my place to say something about another man's family. Maybe I was also telling myself it simply wasn't my business. You told me at the right time, I said. Earl's brow creased. How can you say that with any certainty? I looked at him steadily. Because if you'd told me in July, I had nothing else in place to support it. One neighbor's account of a window observation, Voss would have taken that apart in 20 minutes, maybe less. The bank records took until September to obtain. The Hargrove file only surfaced in October. The forensic report on the document wasn't completed until last week. The revocation statement from Caleb was signed 3 days ago. I held his gaze. I needed every single one of those things in place before any one piece of the whole could carry weight in court. You gave me the time to build the rest of it, whether you intended to or not. Earl was quiet for a long moment considering that. Then he said, tomorrow morning, do you want me there with you? I looked at the man who had lived next door to this house for 20 years, who had watched from his window and shaken his head and kept his own counsel through a long, slow autumn, and who had finally crossed the yard on a Sunday night with his hat in both hands, because he had decided that sitting on what he knew was no longer something he was willing to do. You'd come as a witness, I said. That means waiting in the corridor until they call you. It means sitting in that chair and being questioned by someone whose professional purpose is to make you doubt what you saw. I understand what it means, Earl said. Then yes, I said. I want you there. Earl nodded once the firm finished nod of a man who has made his decision and has no intention of revisiting it. He put his hat on, moved toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped and turned back one last time. I've been standing next to this house for 20 years, Doug, watching from the window, watering my garden, shaking my head at things I didn't think were my place to speak on. He paused. I think it's time I stood up and actually did something. He stepped out onto the porch and walked back across the yard, the slow, deliberate walk of a man who had somewhere to be in the morning and knew exactly what it was going to ask of him. I stood in the doorway until he was inside. Then I closed the door and went back to the kitchen table. I picked up my pen and turned to a fresh page on the legal pad. At the top, I wrote one line: Earl Davenport, eyewitness, July and August. I underlined it once, set the pen down, and for the first time in a week, I felt the ground beneath me hold steady. The courtroom on the third floor of Charleston County Courthouse held maybe 40 seats. 6 weeks after the 30-day notice was served, we finally had a court date. At 9 in the morning, fewer than a dozen were occupied. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Fletcher. Caleb, who had formally waived his occupancy rights in a notarized statement the week prior, sat one row back. Behind the low wooden divider, hands folded, Earl Davenport sat at the far end of the same row hat on his knee. At the defense table, Raymond Voss arranged his papers with the practiced calm of a man who had done this many times. Serena sat beside him in a dark blazer spine, straight eyes forward. Judge Patricia Holloway entered at 9:02, 60 years old, 30 years on the bench, with the particular stillness of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything that happened in a courtroom. She sat adjusted her reading glasses and looked at both tables. We're here on the matter of Mercer versus Mercer civil eviction and residency dispute 114 Church Street, Charleston. Mr. Voss, you filed the motion. You may begin. Voss stood. Your Honor, my client Serena Mercer has resided continuously at 114 Church Street for 18 months. Her husband, Caleb Mercer, is the biological son of the property owner. Mr. Douglas Mercer removed the household belongings without lawful notice, creating psychological duress and effectively forcing my client out of her established residence without justification. Judge Holloway looked up from her notes. Mr. Crane, Fletcher rose without hurry. Your Honor, Douglas Mercer has been the sole legal owner of 114 Church Street since 1987. There is no lease agreement. There is no residency contract of any kind. A 30-day eviction notice was served in full compliance with South Carolina Code Title 27. The notice is valid. The timeline is valid. The ownership is undisputed. He sat down. Judge Holloway made a note. Continue, Mr. Voss. Voss lifted a document from his stack and held it toward the bench. Your Honor, we have a signed residency transfer agreement dated March 2023, bearing Mr. Douglas Mercer's signature, in which he voluntarily transferred occupancy rights to the current residence. Fletcher was on his feet before Voss finished the sentence. Your Honor, we have a forensic analysis report from an independent document examiner. The signature on that agreement is authentic. However, the surrounding text was produced at least 3 months after the signature itself was obtained, meaning the signature was extracted from a separate document entirely and incorporated into fabricated text. Under South Carolina, Code Section 161310, this constitutes criminal forgery, a felony carrying up to 10 years imprisonment and a fine of $10,000. He placed the report on the bench. Judge Holloway picked it up and read the summary paragraph without expression. She looked at Voss over her glasses. Do you wish to respond to this report, Mr. Voss? Voss paused. It was the first time he had paused since the session began. He looked at the report in the judge's hands, then at the copy Fletcher had placed on the defense table, then back at the judge. Your Honor, we would request additional time to review. No, Judge Holloway set the report down. We'll proceed. Mr. Crane, your first witness. Your Honor, I call Earl Davenport. Earl stood from his seat at the end of the row, walked forward, and settled into the witness chair with both hands resting on the armrests, the posture of a man who had decided exactly what he was going to say and was in no hurry about it. Fletcher approached. Mr. Davenport, please describe what you observed in July of this year. I was in my front room. The window looks directly across to Mr. Mercer's property. The door to his home office was open, not wide, just ajar. The light was on inside. Earl spoke at an even pace, no hesitation. I saw a woman standing in the room. She had her phone held up, and she was going through the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, photographing documents one at a time before moving to the next. Voss stood. Objection. The witness is characterizing what he observed. Wingdikstonens, ombord åskserent. Overruled. Judge Holloway didn't look up. The witness is describing a direct visual observation. Continue, Mr. Crane. Fletcher, Mr. Davenport. Were you able to identify the woman? Earl, yes. I've lived next door to that house for 20 years. I know Serena Mercer by sight. Fletcher, how long did you observe her in that room? Earl, at least 8 minutes. I watched because something felt wrong. I couldn't have told you exactly what at the time, but something felt wrong. Fletcher nodded. No further questions. Voss stood for cross-examination. He asked about the window distance, the light conditions, the angle of view. Earl answered each question in the same steady voice, without retreating from a single detail. After 6 minutes, Voss sat down. Voss made one final attempt. Your Honor, I'd like to raise a point of significance. Caleb Mercer is Mr. Douglas Mercer's biological son. Under established principles of familial property equity, Mr. Douglas Mercer's deliberate exclusion of his son from the family estate. Fletcher stood and placed a thin folder on the judge's bench. Your Honor, I submit a notarized amendment to Mr. Douglas Mercer's will, executed October 15th, 2024. Under this amendment, the entirety of the property at 114 Church Street passes to Caleb Mercer, and only Caleb Mercer as sole beneficiary with no co-inheritor named. He paused for exactly one beat. Mr. Douglas Mercer is not excluding his son. He is protecting his son's inheritance from a third party. Voss looked at the folder on the bench. He sat down. The room was very quiet. Judge Holloway looked across both tables, without particular expression, the look of someone delivering a conclusion she had reached some time ago. The residency transfer agreement submitted by the defense has been independently confirmed as a forged document. The eyewitness testimony of Mr. Davenport is consistent and credible. The eviction notice was lawfully served. The motion for relief is denied. She turned a page. The eviction order is granted. The respondent has 30 days from today's date to vacate the property at 114 Church Street, Charleston, South Carolina. The forged document will be referred to the Charleston County District Attorney's Office for review and potential criminal prosecution. She picked up her gavel and brought it down once clean final, no drama in the sound itself. Voss gathered his papers into his case, stood and walked out of the courtroom without looking at either table. Serena remained standing for 1 second. Then she turned and looked directly at me the first time she had looked at me since the session began. The look was straight and unreadable. I met it without expression. There was nothing left to say, and both of us knew it. She turned and walked to the door. Caleb sat beside me and didn't move. He looked down at his own hands for a long moment. The way a person looks at something they are checking still belongs to them. Or I put my hand on his shoulder once, brief and steady. The rental truck arrived at 7:45 in the morning. I heard it from the kitchen, the low rumble of an engine idling at the curb, then 2 doors opening and closing in quick succession. I stayed where I was. I filled the kettle, set it on the burner, and listened to the sounds of the house being partially undone footsteps on the stairs, the groan of furniture being shifted across hardwood. I had laid myself. The front door opening and closing in a steady, indifferent rhythm. Caleb stood in the hallway behind the kitchen. He didn't go to the window. Neither of us spoke while it was happening. It took 41 minutes. Then the truck doors closed. The engine turned over. The sound moved away from the house down Church Street and was gone. I poured the coffee. I carried both mugs to the table and set one in front of my son. Caleb wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the surface of the coffee for a long moment before looking up. You doing all right? I'm all right. You sure? I looked at my son across the table. I built this house 37 years ago. I've watched more storms come through than you've had birthdays. The house is still standing. I picked up my mug. So am I. Caleb nodded slowly. He didn't push further. Some things didn't need more words than that. We sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. Outside a car passed. A neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. The kitchen held the particular quiet of a room that has just had something removed from it and is deciding what it sounds like now. That kind of quiet is not empty. It is full of everything the room has absorbed over the years. Every argument, every ordinary evening, every meal that no one remembers and everyone carried forward without knowing it. Caleb turned his mug in a slow circle on the table. "Fletcher mentioned you have a plan for the house," he said. "A long-term plan. You never said anything about it." "I'm saying it now." I set my mug down. "Do you remember Bill Rafferty?" Caleb thought for a moment. "Old Mason, your friend. He died in 2021, alone, in a rented room on Cannon Street, $300 a month, low ceiling, no window facing the street." I looked at the table for a second, then back up at my son. "Bill laid the first brick on 3 buildings within 4 blocks of this house with his own hands over 40 years of work. And he finished his life in a room that people walked past on the outside without ever knowing it was there." Caleb was quiet. "I remember when you came home from his funeral," he said. "You didn't say a word the whole rest of that day. I was thinking about this house, about what it could do if it was something more than an inheritance sitting on a deed." I leaned back in my chair. "The 2 bedrooms upstairs, the large ones on the north end. I've signed an agreement with the Low Country Housing Initiative. They're a non-profit based here in Charleston. They'll convert those 2 rooms into small, self-contained units, affordable rental well below market rate, for older tradespeople, people who built things in this city for decades and don't have much to show for it when the work runs out." I paused. "People like Bill." Caleb sat with that for a long moment. The morning light moved slowly across the kitchen table as the sun came up over the roofline across the street. Somewhere down the block, someone was already out with a leaf blower, the ordinary sounds of a city that keeps moving, regardless of what any single house has been through. "And how long have you been thinking about this?" "Since I stood at Bill's graveside and counted 8 people. I said the number plainly, no anger in it, just the weight of it. 8 people came to say goodbye to a man whose handwork is still holding up the walls and floors and buildings all over this city. 8 people, and most of them were from the trade." Caleb looked at me, really looked at me the way a person looks at someone when they realize they've been seeing them without fully understanding what they were looking at. "What do you need from me?" I looked back at my son, 38 years old, sitting in the kitchen of a house that had been standing since before he was born, asking the right question at exactly the right time. "Do you still know how to handle a hammer?" Something shifted in Caleb's face. Not a dramatic shift, just the particular loosening that happens when a person sets something down they didn't realize they were still carrying. He smiled. Not the kind of smile that gets placed on a face for the sake of appearances. The real kind. The kind that starts in the eyes before it reaches anywhere else. "You taught me when I was 10 years old. I remember." I picked up my coffee. "Then we start Monday." Caleb nodded once firmly. "Monday?" He picked up his own mug and drank. And for the first time in weeks, the kitchen felt like what it had always been, a room where 2 people could sit down at a table together and quietly work out what came next. That afternoon, I was upstairs in the larger of the 2 north bedrooms with Caleb when I heard the familiar sound of someone stopping at the fence line below. I didn't need to look out the window to know it was Earl Davenport. After 20 years as my closest neighbor on Church Street, I recognized the particular quality of his stillness, the way he could stand somewhere without making a sound and still make his presence fully felt, the way certain people do when they have earned the right to simply be where they are. I kept working. Caleb had the measuring tape stretched across the far wall, calling numbers out to himself in a low, focused voice. Then I was checking the ceiling seam above the north window, the same window I had framed in 1987, the same glass I had set by hand on a cold February morning when this whole street looked different, and I was 31 years old, and certain I had the time to do everything twice if I needed to. The contractor had flagged the seam on Thursday. He was right to flag it. We were talking about load-bearing options, about what reinforcement the east wall would need before the drywall could go in, about the Low Country Housing Initiative's timeline for the conversion, and whether the electrical inspection would hold. Ordinary talk. The kind of talk that means something is actually being built. At some point, I glanced toward the window and caught a fragment of movement below Earl at the fence hat in his hand, looking up at the north face of the house. He stood there for a minute, maybe a little longer than that. Then I saw him nod once, slow and unhurried, the way a man nods when he has seen enough to know how something ends, and put his hat back on. He turned toward his own front door, stepped inside, and drew it closed quietly behind him. I turned back to the ceiling seam. "What are you smiling at?" Caleb asked from across the room. "Nothing," I said, "just the house." Outside Church Street lay quiet in the late afternoon, the light low and generous across the rooftops, the air cool and still. The old live oaks holding their positions along the sidewalk, the way they had for longer than any of us had been here. The houses stood along the block, the way well-built things stand. Without announcement, without ceremony, simply present, having outlasted everything that had tried, in one way or another, to move them. The house held. It was still holding. Fletcher called at 8:43 on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen at the apartment I'd been renting on Beaufort Street since the move, a single-bedroom unit, clean and functional, nothing on the walls yet. I had the radio on low and a half-eaten piece of toast on the counter when the phone rang. "Come in this morning if you can," Fletcher said. "The DA's office made contact yesterday. There are things you need to hear in person." I was in Fletcher's office by 10. Fletcher's desk had 3 folders on it arranged in a row. He waited until I was seated before he opened the first one. "The Charleston County District Attorney's Office has formally notified us that they are proceeding with criminal prosecution of Serena Mercer on 1 count of felony document forgery under South Carolina Code, Section 161310. He turned the folder so I could see the letterhead. "They have the forensic report, the filing cabinet evidence from Earl Davenport's testimony, and the Hargrove Properties records. They believe the case is strong." "And all right," I said. "There's more." Fletcher opened the second folder. "Caleb will be subpoenaed as a prosecution witness. His testimony about signing the financial power of attorney in good faith and his revocation statement are both material to the case. He needs to be prepared for that. I'll tell him." Fletcher didn't move to the third folder right away. He looked at me for a moment in the way he sometimes did before delivering something he hadn't entirely decided how to frame. "There's something else," he said. "The DA's office ran a background search as standard procedure. They found a prior incident. Georgia, 2019. I went still. A 71-year-old man. Coastal property. The same pattern of forged residency document, a claim of occupancy rights pressure applied through legal channels." Fletcher kept his voice even. "That case never went to trial. It was settled out of court. The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement, which is why it didn't surface earlier. Serena was never charged. She walked away with enough money that nobody asked further questions." The room was quiet for several seconds. "Did he have children?" I asked. "1 son. The son was the one who persuaded his father to sign the settlement agreement." I looked at the folder without touching it. "Does Caleb know about Georgia?" Fletcher paused. "That's the question you need to ask him. We met at a restaurant on King Street at noon, a corner booth the lunch crowd loud enough that our conversation wouldn't carry. Caleb was already there when I arrived. He had ordered water and was reading something on his phone, which he put away when I sat down. We ordered. Made brief, easy conversation about the upstairs renovation. The framing was going well. The contractor from the Low Country Housing Initiative was thorough. We'd be ready for drywall by the end of the month. Normal talk. The kind that fills space while both people work up to the thing they actually came to say. When the food arrived, I waited until Caleb had picked up his fork. "Then, did you know about Georgia?" Caleb set his fork down. He didn't look startled. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a specific door to open and had now watched it open. "She told me it was a misunderstanding," he said. "A contract dispute with a former landlord. She said it got out of hand, lawyers got involved, and it was resolved. She said it was nothing." He looked at the table. "She said it before we got married. I asked because someone mentioned there had been some kind of legal trouble. She had an answer ready." "The man was 71 years old," I said. "Coastal property, the same method, and his son talked him into signing a settlement agreement to make it go away." Caleb was very still. "She practiced on me," he said quietly. "Before she came here, she practiced the whole thing on someone else. Found out what worked and what didn't. I didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. I just looked at my son and let the weight of it sit where it belonged. Caleb put both elbows on the table and pressed his hands together, looking down between them. A long moment passed. "I'm sorry, Dad." "I know." "That's not enough." "No," I said, "but it's where you start." Caleb looked up. His jaw was set, not with anger, with the particular resolve of someone who has just located the ground under their feet after a long time of not being sure it was there. "What do I need to do for the DA's office?" "Tell the truth, all of it. The same way you read that paper at the Queen Street Cafe, carefully and completely." "I can do that." "I know you can." We finished our food. The conversation moved back to the renovation. Easier now, the weight slightly redistributed between us. Caleb had a question about load-bearing walls on the north side. I had an answer. We argued mildly about the best approach. Caleb pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of the framing from that morning. I looked at it for a longer moment than strictly necessary. "That's good work," I said. Caleb looked at the photo too. "You taught me how to frame a wall when I was 12. I remember. The check came, I reached for it, Caleb let me. I was on Rutledge Avenue 20 minutes into the drive back when my phone rang through the car speaker. Fletcher. Douglas. The tone was the same one Fletcher used when something required full attention. "The DA's office reached out this afternoon with an additional request. They want you to consider serving as the primary prosecution witness, not just providing documents testifying in open court on record." I kept my eyes on the road. They believe your testimony, combined with Earl Davenport's account and Caleb's statement, gives them the strongest possible foundation for conviction. A pause. "But you should understand what that means. Your name, the address, the full history of the property, the financial records, the Hargrove correspondence, all of it becomes part of the public court record. Anyone can access it. It will be reported." The traffic light ahead turned red. I stopped. "The whole story goes public," Fletcher said. "Your house, your name, everything." Another pause, shorter this time. "Are you ready for that?" The light held red. I looked at the intersection. Rutledge Avenue in December, the low winter light coming in, flat and clear from the west. The old buildings standing along both sides of the street, the way they always had. "Yes," I said. The light turned green. I drove. The north bedroom smelled like fresh drywall and sawdust, and the particular cold of a January morning that hasn't quite decided to warm up yet. I was running a sanding block along the seam above the window when Caleb came up the stairs, carrying 2 coffees and a folded sheet of measurements. He set both cups on the sawhorse we'd been using as a work table, looked at the wall I was working on, and said nothing for a moment, the practiced silence of someone who has learned to look at a thing properly before commenting on it. "The contractor says the second unit will be ready for walkthrough by the end of the month," Caleb said. "I know. I spoke with him Thursday. He also said the electrical in the east room passed inspection, first try." Caleb handed over one of the coffees. He seemed surprised. "He shouldn't be. I ran that wiring myself in 1991. Caleb looked at the ceiling. "You ran the electrical." "I built the house, Caleb." "Right." A pause. I keep forgetting how much that actually means. I hadn't told Caleb about the plea agreement over the phone. I'd waited until we were standing in the same room, with work in our hands, the way my own father had always delivered difficult news, with something useful to do nearby. "It's done," I said, keeping the sanding block moving. "She entered a guilty plea 2 weeks ago, avoided trial. The judge gave her a suspended sentence and ordered restitution. Voss negotiated hard first offense in this jurisdiction, full cooperation with the Georgia Review, restitution agreed up front. That bought her the lighter outcome." Caleb was quiet. "She won't serve time," I added. "But the conviction is on the record. The Georgia case has been reopened for review. Did you have to testify?" "Written statement. Fletcher handled most of it in chambers." I stopped sanding, looked at the seam. "It's public record now, the whole thing." Caleb turned his coffee cup in both hands. "How do you feel about that?" I considered the question honestly. Like a man who told the truth and let it go where it needed to go. Caleb nodded once. Then he unfolded his measurement sheet and we went back to work. Walter Gaines arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He was a big man, wide through the shoulders, the kind of build that 45 years of Finnish carpentry produces, and that doesn't entirely leave a person even in their 70s. He came up the stairs slowly but steadily, one hand on the rail, and stepped into the north unit with the particular look of a tradesperson entering a space they intend to evaluate properly. He didn't speak immediately. He crossed to the far wall, pressed a palm flat against it, then knocked twice with his knuckle, listening. "Good build," he said. "Who did these walls—" I said. 37 years ago." Walter turned around. He looked at me the way a person looks when a face is triggering something they can't quite locate, running it through memory, matching it against something older and further back. Then it landed. Doug Mercer. Walter Gaines. A beat of silence, the kind that exists between two people who have just crossed 30 years in about 4 seconds. "Wentworth Street project," Walter said. 1994. "The concrete pour," I said. "Wrong angle on the east approach. We had to break it up and start over." Walter laughed a deep, unhurried sound, the laugh of a man who has enough distance from the hard days to find them funny. The site supervisor screamed for 3 solid hours. I thought he was going to pull his own hair out. He didn't have much left to pull. "No," Walter said. He did not. We stood there a moment, 2 men in our 70s in a half-finished room, with 30 years between the last time we'd seen each other and right now. And somehow, the distance didn't feel as large as it should have. Walter looked around the unit again, slower this time. The window, the trim work, the proportions of the room. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "This apartment, this rent." He said the number the Low Country Housing Initiative had quoted him. "You could get 3 times that on the open market, more." The way Church Street is going. I looked at the window. The same window I'd framed in 1987, the glass replaced twice. Since then, the view of Church Street unchanged. "There was a man named Bill Rafferty," I said. "Mason, one of the best in the city. He laid the first brick on the building on the corner of this block, with his own hands in 1979. I paused. "He died in 2021, alone. Rented room on Cannon Street, no window facing the street. 8 people at the funeral." Walter said nothing. "I built this house to stand," I said. "Not just structurally." I turned from the window and looked at Walter directly. "Bill Rafferty deserved better than what he got. So do you. So does every man who spent 40 years building things in this city and ended up with nothing solid underneath them." Walter looked at the wall again. He reached out and pressed his palm against it one more time, slower now, different in intention. "I'll take the apartment," he said. "I know you will." By 4 o'clock, the light had dropped and gone golden, the particular slant of January sun in Charleston that makes everything look slightly more permanent than it is. Caleb was in the second unit with a tape measure calling numbers out to himself, writing them in a small notebook, the same kind I had used for 4 decades, picked up from the same hardware store on East Bay Street. I stood in the doorway. "This wall is off by about half an inch from the plans," Caleb said without looking up. "I know." Caleb looked up. "You know, I left it that way on purpose." Caleb lowered the tape measure. "Why?" "Because no structure is perfectly plumb in every direction," I said. "And that half inch is there to remind me, and whoever comes after me, that a person built this. Not a machine, not a computer. A man with a level and a chalk line who did his best and knew that his best was good enough, even if it wasn't perfect." Caleb looked at the wall for a long moment. Then he looked back down at his notebook and wrote 4 words in the margin, slow and deliberate. "Intentional, do not correct." He capped the pen. I stepped into the room and stood beside my son. We both looked up at the ceiling I had framed by hand in the winter of 1987, that had held through every storm and every season and everything else the years had brought through the door of 114 Church Street. Outside the window, Church Street lay quiet in the late afternoon, the live oaks still the old houses standing along the block, the way they had for 150 years. Each one slightly imperfect, each one still standing. The house held. It had always held. That half inch in the wall. I keep coming back to it. A man builds something with his own hands, lives inside it for 37 years, and nearly loses it, not to a storm, not to time, but to the people he let through the front door. That is the kind of family betrayal that doesn't announce itself. It arrives slowly dressed in ordinary clothes, sitting at your dinner table, calling you by name. I am not a man who speaks about faith often, but I will say this once the morning I stood on that porch and watched Earl shake his head through the window. I believe something larger than my own instincts was already at work. Not everything that holds a structure together is visible in the blueprints. If this family story has taught me anything, it is that I waited too long to look directly at what I already knew. I told myself things were manageable. I kept the peace. I cooked the dinners. Don't be like me in that regard. When something feels wrong in the foundation in your home, in your marriage, in your family, look at it straight. The longer you wait, the deeper the crack travels. My opinion, for what it's worth, trust is not weakness, but trust without attention is a door left open. Family betrayal rarely comes from strangers. A good man can be generous and still be clear-eyed. Those two things are not opposites. The most important family story you will ever protect is the one still being written inside your own walls. If you have ever lived through a family betrayal of your own, or watch someone you love walk through one, leave a comment below. Your words may be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Share this with that person. And if you want to follow the next family story when it arrives, subscribe. It is already waiting. Thank you for staying until the very last word. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements constructed for the purpose of reflection and education. If that is not the content you are looking for, that is completely understood. Step away and choose what serves you better. For those who stay, I will see you in the next one.